you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Carol Cadby, and I'm the teacher of the Performing Your Stories class. If you enjoy what you see tonight, we encourage you to share with friends, leave a comment, or like the video. If you would like to check these stories out at a later time, they will be posted on the Theater Lab YouTube site. Some housekeeping. The Theater Lab is currently enrolling students in our late summer session for adults, and we're offering many scholarships to enable those individuals who were financially impacted by the COVID crisis to take classes. For more information, please visit theaterlab.org or follow at theaterlabdc on social media. This class, the Performing Your Stories class, will also be offered starting next week, Monday. So if you like what you see, please consider enrolling. Tonight, you are in for something special. You have the privilege of watching 8 incredible individuals tell 8 amazing personal stories in a Moth or TED Talk style. These stories were generated over a 6-week period in a class that met once a week for 2.5 hours. And for most of these students, this is their first time storytelling. And for all of them, this is definitely their first time storytelling on Zoom. I am very proud of them. They have dug deep to find their stories, their passions, and their authentic voice. And they have the courage and the willingness to share them with you tonight. So sit back and enjoy.
3 years ago, I would have rather drink gasoline than to get up on the stage and talk to you. I am not alone. In fact, approximately 75% of individuals report a fear of public speaking, and it remains the greatest fear of all time. But why? Is it negative evaluation of others that we fear? Well, Dr. Sayosides, a neuropsychologist who's written books on barriers to success, lends us these 3 theories. The first is hyperarousal of your nervous system, which can actually interfere with your ability to speak. The second is this idea that we're not good enough, and that somehow getting on stage and showing our vulnerability is a potential threat to our image. And the last is lack of skills. And yet I find, because of this fear, that when you do get on stage, your audience tends to root for you. After all, you're doing something people can only dream of. But this is not enough to get people on stage. And it was not enough to get me on stage until I discovered the power of storytelling. Story changed my life. Before storytelling, had you asked me something about the past or something about when I was younger, I would have told you I don't remember. All of those memories gone, or so I thought. When I began storytelling, I began doing these memory exercises. And all of a sudden, I remembered holidays. And my next door neighbor, Hilda, who was also my mentor, I remembered the stories my dad would tell me. And I even remembered the moments I got along with my siblings. All of these memories make up my life, and I got them back. And yet, even with these new stories, I still find myself only telling them in private, mostly to my husband and a few friends. And then 2 years ago, I got asked to go on stage and tell a story. My first reaction was no. Yeah, no. What if they laughed at me? Or worse, what if they didn't because I was boring? And then I remembered what stories do for us. They help you own your narrative, meaning your interpretation of your experience is where your power lies. I even heard someone say, you can't change your experience, but you can change its ending. Stories are about pivotal points of our lives. They're about transformation. We all have them. In between scary and sad, we have extraordinary. And I realized 2 years ago, as I am walking up on that stage, I am about to tell a story regarding the scariest night, one of the scariest nights of my life. And yet I don't want to just talk about my fear. There are other moments in that story. Like I am riding on Amtrak for the first time in my life, and I am beyond ecstatic. It was an amazing ride. And then I got some great advice from my millennial friends, and it saves me that evening. And at the end of that entire ordeal, I ended up in a beautiful resort for a week-long leadership development retreat. And it was amazing. Now, I want you to think about your extraordinary moments, whether it's the birth of your child, the moment you realize you were falling deeply in love with your future life partner, or the day you learned how to ride a bike and you could feel that wind in your face and you could taste the freedom. And now I want you to think about telling that story to someone. Imagine that moment. You begin to activate your listener's brain in such a way that their memories begin to surface. Memories that are much like your story and have the same feelings you're sharing. In other words, you have the ability to help someone relive their extraordinary moments just by telling your story. This is also called neural coupling. And we see it often when we're telling a story and our listener immediately responds with, oh my God, I remembered when I was a kid and I had an aunt. And you think, did you even listen to my story? Did you hear what I said? Yeah, they did. Their brain heard every word. And what happened was that it released a memory. And now they want to share it with you. This is powerful. But what does any of this have to do with getting on stage? Well, you now know that you have an opportunity to give someone their life back. So the next time you're asked to get on stage, I challenge you to take that opportunity. Put down that gasoline. Don't miss the chance of helping someone relive their moments. Let the power of storytelling override your fear of getting on stage. Believe me, you won't regret it.
If one more person tells me I need to find my passion, I'm gonna scream. What does that even mean? And where do I look for it? Over there, over here? What does that mean? And what does that even do for you? See, I found my passion and it almost killed me. But we'll get to that. You know, I was told a story when I was younger about a man who went around town helping people. You know, I think he even turned water into wine. but they did some bad things to him. And when I grew up, I heard the same story, but it was made into a movie. And the same story, they did some terrible things. But they called that movie The Passion of the Christ. Now, there was nothing in that movie that seemed passionate. See, I thought passion was about joy and about happiness and about doing what you love. So why would they call this movie The Passion? So I went and got a dictionary and I looked it up. And I wanted to look up the etymology of the word. Forget the definition. And you know what I found? You know what I found? Passion is suffering. Suffering. Passion is suffering? We had it wrong all along. So I think about what I do for a living. And I got a pretty good job, 6 figures, working from home. Who wouldn't be passionate about that? And I'm constantly trying to be a top performer, answering emails late at night, working on the weekends. But at some point, that landed me in the hospital. So what happened that morning was I woke up and I had a pain in my side and I couldn't breathe. So I got rushed to the hospital and I went to the ER. I didn't think it was nothing. It was flu season. Everybody's in the hospital with masks on. Now, this is pre-COVID. Little did they know what was to come. But everybody's in the hospital with their masks on, and I'm going back for a little pain in my side. I figured I'd be out of there in a snap. They run their tests. They take some blood. They send me back to the waiting room. Then eventually they asked me to go to the back of the ER. So I get put into this little gurney. I get pushed to the back, and I'm sitting there for maybe 5-6 minutes. Next thing I know, here comes a doctor. D'Angelo, did you know you had multiple PEs in your right lung? I said, no, I didn't know that, doc. He said, yeah, you're going to have to stay overnight. We're going to have to send you upstairs. I said, man, now I'm terrified. Mainly because I didn't know what the hell PEs were. So I called my mother because she's a doctor. I said, Ma, they said I got multiple PEs in my lungs. I figured they'd just give me some Motrin and send me home, right? She said, oh, baby, no, that's not good. Those are blood clots, and those can kill you. I said, that would have been nice to know, doc. They can kill me. So anyway, they take me upstairs, and I'm in this room for the rest of the week. They had 2 IVs in my arms, one in this arm, one in this arm. One is blood thinner medicine flowing through my body. The other one is just for them to have easy access to my veins so they could come in at all hours of the night taking blood, and I mean all hours of the night. I can still hear those wheels creeping towards my door. D'Angelo, we're here to take some more blood. Oh, thanks. I mean, they took so much blood, I started to think the hospital was ran by vampires. And I started to get a little lightheaded. But what was crazy is, as I'm in the hospital, as I'm in that bed, getting blood drawn, I'm still doing this. Still responding to emails, still trying to say, oh, sorry, I can't take your call, I'm out. I'm on my deathbed. And that's when it hit me. Maybe this is the reason I'm in here. Maybe I've been working too hard. I did a little more research on PEs while I'm in there, and it said, stress causes this. Oh, maybe I need to chill on the work. So anyway, I finally get released from the hospital, and I go see my mom because she had driven all the way down from Michigan to come see me. And I said, Ma, what is it that I actually enjoy doing? Because I thought I was passionate about this work, but it's killing me. And I know passion means suffering, but come on. She said, well, baby, you always like drawing. You spend a lot of time to yourself. You love dancing. You love playing music. And I'm listening as she's talking. And I'm like, I don't do any of that anymore. All I do is work. All I do is respond to emails and make sure that I'm still seen as a top performer at my job. So in a way, I'm suffering, But there's nothing on the other side of that suffering. And that's when it hit me again. Suffering is part of the equation, but passion is suffering, and passion is suffering, but with a purpose. Then I remember that story I heard when I was younger. That man was suffering because he knew that that suffering would lead to something. He knew that that suffering had value. So I started applying that to my life. I started getting back into the things that brought me joy. The things that I suffered for, yes. I spent hours in rehearsal at dance. I spent hours trying to get the detail just right on the drawings. I even signed up for acting class so I can get back into that creative environment. And you know, I'm still suffering. But now I'm doing it with a purpose. Oh, and I can breathe again.
As I sit here on this balmy, humid July DC day at my dining room table, surrounded by piles and piles of papers and pictures. It's been 531 days since I last heard my mom's voice, and 1,751 days since I last heard my dad's voice. And here I am, surrounded by all of our papers and our pictures and memories. And I'm transported back to a simpler time, when I was a happy-go-lucky, chubby girl with kind of a bowl cut. I used to love listening to my parents' stories back in those days. My dad liked to tell me stories about my Grandma Miller, his mom. He would tell me how the first thing that she would take out of her fridge when she was cooking or baking was an onion. They used to worry that she was going to turn into an onion because she liked them so much. And he would tell me stories of growing up in Buffalo in the 1950s in an impoverished neighborhood, and how my grandma would go and find the cheapest and the scratchiest burlap potato sacks that she could find. And she would make clothes for my dad and uncle out of them. Jackets, pants, shirts. And as he told me that, he would roll his eyes. And he would say, her favorite color was red. Everything that I owned and wore was red. If I never have to wear red again, it'll be too soon. And I usually chuckled when he said that because he was most likely wearing a red shirt. Anybody who knew my dad knew that he was no slave to fashion. And then there's my mom. My mom used to like to tell me stories about her grandpa, great-grandpa Irvin. Yes, Irvin, he's exactly what you're picturing. She would tell me the tale of when she was a 20-something and he was an 80-something, and they decided to take a cross-country road trip from Buffalo, New York to California. My great-grandpa Irvin could not see, could barely hear, yet he insisted on driving and only listened to Johnny Cash. My mom hated Johnny Cash. But my favorite Grandpa Irvin story is the time when my mom was on a blind date. She was set up and they were out on her deck drinking a nice cool glass of iced tea, having a grand old time. And in the driveway was parked her brand new, barely a week old shiny car. And as they were talking, Great Grandpa Irvin started driving up the road. And as if in slow motion, but not quite slow enough, the sound heard around the neighborhood was, my mom jumped up. She ran to the edge of the deck and propelled herself off of the 5 feet to the ground, huffed up to my grandpa and said things, profanities that quite frankly are not appropriate for right here and right now, but were along the lines of, "What the bleep do you think you were doing? That's my bleeping new car. Are you kidding me? You just scratched my new car." To which Great Grandpa Irvin just kind of shrugged his shoulders and looked over. Oh well. And he walked back into the house. Needless to say, there wasn't a second date. I love those stories. I loved being able to get to know a piece of my family that I didn't know. And as I sit here at my dining room table, I'm surrounded by so many great memories. I see all the high points of my parents' life. My mom's graduation from nursing school, her nursing license, my parents' wedding, their honeymoon, and our very first family photo. But I realized that these photos, they show us the high points of life, but they don't tell the whole story. Because in these papers, there's also the not so great things of my parents' life. There's my parents' divorce papers, the letters and letters and letters that my dad wrote my mom, begging her not to go. There's the 10-year struggle with addiction that my mom had, her arrest records, the jobs that she lost, the trauma and therapy journals she wrote. And I realized that all those stories and memories passed down give us a really beautiful glimpse into the people who once were. They don't tell the whole story. A person's true legacy, their true essence, can only be found in those that they leave behind, the ones who really knew them, the people like me. Thank you.
A few years ago, one of my college classmates posted a wonderful picture to Facebook of a group of us from college. And it's this beautiful black and white image, and it's a picture of us attending a protest. I scanned the image, and then I saw myself. There I was. I'm a little surprised by what I saw. I had my fist in the air and a smile on my face. Who does that? Who smiles brightly and widely at a protest? It turns out that I do. Now, this is not the image anyone has of an activist, including me. But all these years later, I realized that the truth of who I am was captured in that picture taken oh so many moons ago. And no amount of telling me to be louder or more insistent or more demanding has changed me. I am a quiet activist. I'm introverted, highly sensitive, empathetic, diplomatic, and I'm even the oh so dreaded nice. She's so nice. Now, I know that some of my niceness is conditioned, but what do you do when you've always been nice and always been diplomatic? when you're sensitive to your core, when it's a fundamental part of who you are. I have not found one shared definition of quiet activism. But for me, I use my quietly active voice to work with others to make change inside organizations. This is not traditional activism, but it is active, engaged, and for me, it's authentic. When I think about why quiet activism is so important, I think it's because quiet activism acknowledges that not everyone is a traditional activist, but all of us have an opportunity to make change, regardless of our personality, our socioeconomic status, our physical or mental health, any number of things that cause us to show up in the world in the way that we do. Quiet activism also challenges the idea that you're either smashing the patriarchy or you're a tool of it. I think that there is a rich opportunity for many of us to serve somewhere along that spectrum. I submit to you that to create a more equitable and just society, we need to broaden our definition of activism and bring more people into an activist mindset, not to water down traditional activists, but to support them and to expand the impact of their work. Now, I have asked myself, Monique, why not just call yourself an activist, a diplomat? And I am a diplomat. But there's also a thread of activism that is common to my work over the years, and I want to honor myself for that. I think it's also the case that when we live into our intentions, when we live into the things that we declare about ourselves, they become even more true. That's certainly been the case for me. My activism has expanded over the last 3 years since I made that declaration to myself. Imagine what would happen if we invited other people to do the activism that is theirs to do. Imagine the impact it would have on our society and on the world. What if we said, get in here, there is activism for you to do, and we're here to honor you for it. Instead, I think often we say to people, like, you're showing up in the wrong way, or you're not bold enough. You're not doing it the right way. I think we should say, come on in here. You belong. You have something to contribute. Now, I can hear the negative reaction to this. I've heard it year after year, and it says, well, no change was ever made inside a system, or niceness never dismantled a system. Okay, I'll give you that. But what does that mean for those of us who work on the inside, who are there now and who will be there in the future? I think that we should give quiet activism a try, because what changed me was claiming quiet activism, not trying to be something else. The activism that is most a part of my life is my work to make leadership in organizations more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. This work matters to me. I'm an executive. I've been in leadership roles for years. I've seen the power of having a diverse group of people around the table informing the decisions. I've also seen the consequences of the absence of it. Here are a few things that are important to my work in this regard. First, despite the gains that women have made in every profession, we remain underrepresented at every level of leadership. And this is particularly true for women of color, and it's particularly careful in the private sector. The American Association of University Women found that this is a leadership gender gap, and that it is significant, persistent, and systemic. And when the leadership gender gap intersects with race, age, ability, ethnicity, sexual orientation, it's even more pronounced. For instance, Black women and Hispanic women are the most underrepresented race gender group at the executive level in the private sector of all race gender groups in the workplace. Black women and women with disabilities face the greatest barriers to advancement, get the least support from managers, and receive the least sponsorship of any women in the workplace. This is an area that needs our activism, traditional, quiet, and otherwise. I am seeing some glimmers of hope in this area. Right now, traditional activists are leading the way with protests all over this country. Those protests focus on criminal justice issues, and they and many of us are joining to say that what we want to be true is that Black lives matter. Those protests are spilling into our organizations, and we are having conversations in regular organizations about broader racial justice issues. Those conversations were made possible by traditional activists, and they weren't possible even 2 months ago. Activism in all its forms is powerful, and we need all heads and all hearts on deck to do it. So I say to you, get in here. We need you. We need your contributions, and we will respect them and value them. My name is Monique Fortenberry, and I'm proud to be a quiet activist. How about you?
On April 21st, 1996, my best friend and favorite cook died. 3 weeks earlier, Mom had called to tell me about the cancer, and I was petrified. I couldn't face going home. And I told her, and Mom said she understood. But that night, in the morning, I knew I had to go to her. Mom had always been there for me. So I called her at the hospital to tell her I was on my way home. And a nurse answered the phone and said Mom was about to undergo a procedure. And the nurse told Mom I was on my way, and I heard her happy murmur in the background. She knew I was coming. At 3:17 that afternoon, my dad called. Mom's lung had collapsed. Mom was in the ICU. I raced home. Mom's lung collapsed on Good Friday. That Easter was spent in the ICU with Mom. See, ours was a family of tradition. Holidays meant food. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, we always had the same thing. That Easter in the ICU was without Mom and without her food. I always watched her prepare holiday meals. She would start cooking, and she would give me little tastes as she went on and ask me what was needed. It wasn't until after she died that I realized she'd been teaching me her recipes without me even realizing it. I especially missed Mom's collard greens, Mom's pound cake, Mom's mac and cheese, Mom's potato salad. See, after she was gone, I realized that Thanksgiving was my favorite holiday. Without the gifts of Christmas or the baskets and eggs of Easter, the focus was just food and family. That first Thanksgiving after she died was awful. No Mom, no watching Mom cook, no Mom's food. I couldn't face it. I signed up to work a double at the fancy hotel restaurant where I was a part-time cocktail waitress. By the second Thanksgiving, I had broken up with my fiance, and I was coming down with the flu, I thought. The third Thanksgiving was spent with good friends of mine who had nursed me and stood around me after Mom's death. And they invited Dad up, and he drove up from Richmond. And I passed my daughter around to be held and cooed over by them all. See, I wasn't supposed to be able to get pregnant. My GYN had told me I couldn't have kids and would have to use assisted reproduction. Plus, I'd be doing it on my own, and I was pretty scared. But when the results came back of the blood tests he ran to confirm my pregnancy, we saw that my daughter was due to be born in July. My mom's birthday was in July, so it was settled. That fourth Thanksgiving, I decided I would cook. It wasn't a disaster. I nailed the potato salad, I nailed the dressing. But it was too hard to cook without Mom. So Thanksgiving became this bittersweet holiday for me. It was a time when I loved the memories of watching Mom cook and the taste of her food. But I missed her and I missed her food. After that fourth Thanksgiving, my daughter's father and I, even though we weren't together, we started spending Thanksgiving together as a family. His parents would invite my dad up from Richmond, and my daughter and I would be there, and we were all together. And I discovered that Thanksgiving was my daughter's favorite holiday. It was a time of year for her when Mommy's family and Daddy's family were all together at the Thanksgiving table. My daughter just graduated from college. And when the pandemic hit, she decided to stay in Ithaca. And since she was trapped up there, she got bored and started cooking. And then she started baking. And after she became adept at a few things, she decided she wanted to learn Mom's recipes. So she called my dad. Dad had become adept at preparing Mom's food. So she called Dad to get the recipes. And she nailed the pound cake. She came pretty darn close on the collards, but the mac and cheese is proving to be a bit more of a challenge. And as I've watched my beloved daughter learn Mom's recipes, I realized that I'm really excited for this Thanksgiving. Mom's recipes will be on the table again. Mom's dressing, Mom's collards, Mom's pound cake, and Mom's mac and cheese, together at the Thanksgiving table, surrounded by family. Mom's food prepared by my unexpected daughter, all together. Because, you see, ours is a family of tradition.
What's behind you isn't in front of you. I love that saying. It's my favorite one. I have it hanging on my office wall. It has a lot of meaning to me because, well, I started out as a mistake. Yeah, one of those, oh crap, I'm pregnant kind of mistakes. It was Toronto, 1961. Go Canada. A young professional woman from Western Ontario, lovely, prim, proper, and Catholic. Didn't quite follow the no sex before marriage thing and followed her passions and ended up with the seed that was me. She gave me up for adoption, and somehow I was adopted by an older couple in teeny little Frostburg, Maryland, where everybody knows your name and your business. It was probably because of that gossipy part that my parents decided to tell me at a very young age that I was adopted. They pretty much put it that you are special because you were chosen by us, unlike your friends whose parents all had to take them. Okay, sounded good to me. It made me feel pretty special. But once you know that you're adopted, after a while, you start creating this alternate universe where you're kind of on the outside looking into your life. All the what ifs start happening. What if I'd been raised by my birth mother? What if she had stayed with my birth father? What was he like? What was their relationship? What was my heritage? I had all kinds of friends around me that looked like their family members. Me, not so much. It was this disconnectedness coupled with this constant pressure to be perfect because I was special that made me very hyper aware of my life in general. And it stayed with me as I grew up and became an adult and moved to the DC area. I had a great job. I had a wonderful hobby and a big circle of friends. But there was this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right, that I wasn't complete. So, like many adopted people before me, I decided to start my quest to find my birth parents. Now, these are in the days before the internet and email. Can you even imagine? So it was basically old school sleuthing that you had to do. The good way to start was to actually write a letter to your adoption agency and ask for non-identifying information and then wait, which I did. And 12 months later, 12 months, I get a letter telling me that my birth mother was half Romanian and my birth father was full Czechoslovakian. Oh my gosh, cool, right? Check. That with the Romanian makes me really, really Eastern European. And then I started thinking, okay, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. All those Romanian and Czech gymnasts in the Olympics, they all have like big shoulders and no boobs, and so do I. So that makes sense. I got really excited. I bought a Czech language cassette tape so I could start learning my mother tongue, which lasted a week because it's really hard. I started making plans to visit Prague and Transylvania. I mean, I was into it. It's like the door had been opened. I had found a piece of myself. After that, I took a long break, lasted for a few years. Life got busy and complicated with my family until I got married, and then I had a child myself and was holding that little bundle in the hospital that brought up another question. How does someone give up a child? Well, I had to answer that question. And I had to learn my heritage now so I could pass that on to my daughter. So I finished my search. And for the first time, I met my birth mother in Toronto when I was on business in 2005. Now, this is a huge deal in the adopted person's life, the big meeting, to even be able to make that happen. I was convinced this was going to answer all my questions and life was going to be hunky-dory. The night I met her was not quite that. She came up to us in the hotel lobby and stuck out her hand right away to shake so we wouldn't be able to get close to her, including shaking my daughter's hand, which was weird. We took one picture together. Kind of uncanny. We wore the same colors. We went off by ourselves, just the two of us, to dinner. This conversation started off, frankly, pretty stilted. She was perturbed with me for messing with her life or invading her privacy. But things softened a little and we shared facts of our lives. She told me about my history, some family history. She told me about her grandfather being the Romanian sailor that started the farm in Canada, and that's how their family started. I shared tidbits of my life, more with her than her with me, really, about my family, about how I was raised, about my love of theater. And it went on for a while. She never really embellished anything. She just dropped stoic little facts to me. I had to drag it all out of her. And after a while, I just felt, like she had a very cold, high wall around her. When it was over, we said our goodbyes. She said she didn't want any more contact, which was no surprise. We went on our way. I finished my business in Toronto and got back home and opened up my personal email, and there was a note from her. She was glad to meet me, glad I was raised well, good luck to me and my family, but she wanted to make sure that if I was going to continue searching for my birth father, that now that she'd met me, she was pretty sure she gave the wrong information to the adoption agency and that my birth father was probably the other guy. The other guy? Yeah, there was another guy, not Czechoslovakian, Anglo-Saxon, Fast forward to my ancestry DNA profile, I'm 50% Irish. So it was that moment that struck me right between the eyes so clearly that after all that angst and all that hassling with my identity and struggling and searching and whether I was Czech or whether I was Anglo, at the end of the day, I landed exactly where I was supposed to. I can't imagine what I would have been like if I'd been raised by that woman. My adopted parents needed me, and I needed them to shape me into the person I am today. My adoptive parents needed me, and my daughter, now that I've had her, she's my legacy, and she is going to go on and change the world, frankly. I embraced life a little bit differently after that day. I was not a mistake. I believe that we all land where we're supposed to. There is a reason we are where we are. And while it might be important to find out where you come from, it's how you move forward in life. It's how you start your next story that really matters. What's behind you is not in front of you.
Every year, for each of my extended family members' birthdays, my parents, my siblings, and I get together to sing happy birthday. We do this for each of our family members, but there's one birthday that always felt different from the rest. That is my Uncle Herb's birthday on August 24th. Each year when August 24th rolls around, we call my uncle and promptly sing, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, Uncle Herb, happy birthday to you." And when we finish, my father, without a doubt, says, "Thank God for this day," with a huge smile on his face. I always wondered why he added this extra emphasis for my uncle. It wasn't as if they had some special relationship different from that of his other siblings. It wasn't as if my uncle was the oldest or had played a substitute father for my dad, but for some reason, my father always made it seem like it was an extra special day. And so one day, my curiosity got the better of me, and I asked. My dad chuckled at me and then took me back, way back to the year 1989. At the time, my father was going through a tumultuous divorce. He was in one of the lowest places of his life. Sensing his need for support, my dad's best friend, Smitty, reached out and offered him a place to stay. My dad was able to get out of the negative energy that had taken over his once happy newlywed home, but was still left feeling gloomy in a new space and found himself moping around, laying in bed all day, and just simply not feeling like his normal self. He needed something to brighten up his life. Smitty was in the Air Force Reserve, which means that he was constantly surrounded by people. And being the extrovert that he was, he had made plenty of friends. One hot summer day, some of his Air Force friends decided to drop by to see what Smitty was up to. Of course, this group of ragtag youth would take the opportunity to turn a random gathering into a pool party, because who doesn't like a pool party? One woman in particular caught my father's eye. She was wearing a leopard print bathing suit and was exuberant, funny, and full of life. My father wouldn't give me any more details than that. They were attracted to each other immediately. They spent their time playing in the pool together with some subtle flirting and bathing in the sun while chatting about their lives. They both knew that there was something there, something more. The only problem was they were both married. Going through divorces, yes, but married nonetheless. So when the night came to an end, my dad was hesitant, but hopeful. The woman slipped him her phone number, but he wasn't sure about the timing. I mean, he was still married, and he was going through a rough enough time to be staying with a friend. What did he look like? Calling a woman who was also married, even if she was going through a divorce too. And so he decided to leave it be. If it were meant to be, it would be. But he was going to leave it alone for now. He was 33 and had learned patience, so he would wait until his divorce was finalized out of respect for his situation and hers. 2 days later, he had a court hearing. He had expected it to be just another one of the many court hearings that he had already had. Lots of legal jargon that no one understood, heightened emotions, and just a continuation of his misery. However, in an unexpected turn of events, he left that court hearing as an officially divorced man. The paperwork would still need to be finalized, but for all intents and purposes, he was free. That day was August 24th, my Uncle Herb's birthday. 4 months later, Bruce married Patrice. 16 months later, there was me. And now, nearly 30 years later, they are still happily married and deeply in love. And so now I can celebrate my Uncle Herb's birthday with a bit more joy.
Well, folks, this has been one hell of a year so far. But let me tell you about 1968. 1968 was one of the most tumultuous and historic years in US history. I was in school as the year began. The chronology is mind-blowing. Looking back, it was insane. My life, my family, my friends were all racked with fear and anxiety and personal turmoil. We protested the war and racial inequality, fought over the draft, and we considered a very bleak future. Well, 2020 has already been anxiety-provoking and turbulent, and the year is only half over. I hope by the time the year is over, it will end in a note of hope, but that story is yet to be written. I can tell you that I'm even more anxious about our future than I was those many years ago. Looking back, 1968 was a very fateful year. It started out with a conflict between the US and North Korea that looked like it could lead to war once again on the Korean Peninsula. In early January, the North Koreans had seized a US reconnaissance ship, killed one of the sailors, captured, detained, and tortured the crew. We came very close to war. Then at the end of January, on the 31st, North Vietnamese regular troops and the Viet Cong forces staged what we all remember as the Tet Offensive, resulting in a massive defeat for the US and South Vietnamese forces. In retrospect, that was probably the beginning of the end of that disastrous war. Then there were assassinations, rioting, and bloodshed. In April '68, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. 2 months later in June, just after he had won the California primary, Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles. Both events were followed by riots and protests, but unlike this year, far more riots than protests. Parts of DC were set on fire, blocks of buildings and stores were burned and looted. In fact, my friend Bert's father was killed by looters while protecting his hardware store on 7th Street Northwest. It was a bloody hot summer. The Republicans nominated Richard Nixon for president, and then the very obscure governor of Maryland, Spiro Agnew, for vice president. We all know what happened to Nixon, but Agnew was charged with accepting kickbacks from contractors. He was convicted of tax evasion, and he resigned the vice presidency. The Democrats held their convention in Chicago, the site of large anti-war protests, rioting, enormous police brutality on a massive scale. After a very poor showing in the early primaries, President Johnson had announced in March that he would not run for re-election. And with the death of Senator Kennedy, Vice President Humphrey was able to defeat the remaining anti-war candidate, Senator McCarthy, setting off additional protests that lasted up to the election. The election in November was a cliffhanger, with Nixon defeating Humphrey by a razor-thin margin in the popular vote. The segregationist governor of Alabama, George Wallace, carried 5 southern states as a third-party candidate. Racial tensions and protests sprung up everywhere. At the Olympics in Mexico City in October, 2 Black athletes, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, gave a Black Power salute from the podium during the playing of the national anthem, causing an immediate uproar. If some of this sounds eerily familiar, it's because it is. 2020 has already been and is likely to be even stranger and more tumultuous than '68. We've been engulfed with the COVID-19 virus pandemic that has engulfed the world. As of today, we know the virus is rampant in the US. We lead the world in cases. There's no sign of let-up. All of our lives have changed. The need to social distance, wear masks, has provoked controversy. Rather than gather together, we use electronic devices like Zoom to communicate, study, and bond. The rapid closure of stores, workplaces, entertainment venues, even theater classes, has caused a rapid readjustment of our lives. Unemployment at record levels, the economy in turmoil, and without government help, many families and small businesses are in financial distress and may not survive. On top of that, viral videos of police excesses resulting in the deaths of Black men and women have prompted protests throughout the country. Thankfully, more protests and less rioting than we had in '68. The Black Lives Matter movement, coupled with a change in the perception of many others that racism and discrimination have pervaded the society, has prompted a massive protest movement against symbols of slavery in the form of Confederate statues and monuments. The utter failure of our political leadership to come to grips with these dual crises staggers the imagination. The parallels between '68 and 2020 are telling. We've experienced a similar series of chaotic events, and the future is an unwritten slate. I am very anxious, but also hopeful. Hope for the future lies perhaps in the election in November, or in the ability of this country to bridge the divide, to come together and live up to the letter of our founding documents. I remain anxious, but I hope for the best. Only time will tell.
I hope you enjoyed watching these stories, and if you want to see them again, they will be on the Theater Lab YouTube site. They were fabulous. All the best.